Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Leading in a Crisis podcast. On this podcast, we talk all things crisis management, and we'd like to get stories as shared from experienced crisis leaders. I'm Tom Mueller. With me again today, my co-host Mark Mullen. Mark, welcome back.
Hi, Tom.
And our friend of the podcast and special guest today, Destin Singleton, joining us from New Braunfels, Texas. Destin, what's going on in your world these days in your business? What are you focused on?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, guys. So happy to be back on your top rated podcast. So super exciting. I'm the owner of Emic Communications, and I support my clients through crisis and challenge, which and change projects as well. But I live in Central Texas, and we have some stuff happening around here.
We do. That's the topic we're going to cover today is the communications and emergency response around the flooding over the 4th of July holiday weekend here in Central Texas. There was a town called Kerrville, Texas, which is about, 80 miles west of me where I am and probably about a similar distance, Destin, from where you are. And it was a sort of rapidly developing weather system that dumped a lot of rain and caused some significant flash flooding that, as of our recording today, has taken more than 100 lives, with dozens still missing. So it was just a horrific flood. And of course, lots of issues around communications around that. So we're going to spend a few minutes just talking that through and get our impressions of how these communications have handled and where it might be done a little better. Destin, I know you've been following this fairly closely. What's your initial response to the communications and press briefings that we've been seeing from local officials?
Yeah. Happy to, but first I just want to say how, yeah, this is a horrible, horrible event. And while I don't want to, I want to be sensitive to the fact that people, even in my circle, have lost loved ones. But there are becoming some kind of glaring issues about how communication flowed. Um, among kind of from different government entities, all from federal to local. And so we could talk about those, but also there's been press conferences, sometimes 3 a day, sometimes 2 a day, throughout this event, especially in Kerrville, and talking about what happened in Kerr County from Hunt to Kerrville. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about those press conferences and how those went, and how they've evolved over time. So
Okay.
happy to talk through those.
All right, great. Mark, you're kind of watching this from afar over on the west coast of the United States. What uh, what impressions have you formed about what you've seen so far?
First of all, I always will remember showing up for the BP Deepwater Horizon incident right after it started and being struck with how quickly the topic was the response and the boats, and it was as if everybody had forgotten that people lost their lives in that event. And I appreciate it was in particular BP that took efforts to stop every once in a while and acknowledge the pain of the families. I think some of that is just the sheer physics of the response takes over. But when I see it playing out what I see playing out in public is um, we're beginning to have more than one topics for the press conferences, and we're beginning to be talking as much about weather balloons or staffing as we are talking about families and the tragic price that they've paid because of this. And I suspect a lot of that is inevitable, but I still am a little bit surprised at where the conversation is going. It's a completely appropriate conversation, and it will be replayed and added to in every emergency management agency in the country. But right now it's kind of sticking up and it looks like the kid is elbowing to the front of the room to get more candy.
Yeah,
And
there's definitely,
you go ahead.
well, yeah, there's definitely that. And, we're seeing very quickly this pivot toward who's responsible for this, right? Why weren't there more warnings? Why weren't elected officials, more engaged or earlier or issuing more warnings? And that, of course, is something we see in every major incident, right? What happened? Why did this happen? And in the press conferences I've watched, the spokespersons, typically it's been a sheriff's department or a state police spokesperson, has said, "Hey, we'll have time to have those conversations. Right now, our effort and this whole group who's in front of you are focused on rescuing people who are still out there and bringing closure to families who are looking for their loved ones. That's our focus." And to me, that's an entirely appropriate response at this stage. We're recording on the Monday after 4th of July, which fell on a Saturday. The event happened on Saturday morning, right? And
Right.
Friday morning. Friday morning.
Friday
Right.
morning, that's right, Friday the 4th, yeah.
So day 4.
And yeah. So at some point the conversation has to go there, and of course you have to be ready for that. One of the challenges here is this is a unified command that's running this. So you have city people, county people, um, sheriff's department. Who else was in there? Texas Department of Public Safety, which is state police here. So lots of different people who are having the conversations. And it's sort of, I guess when you look at it, there's a lot of potential finger pointing going around between folks at this point. Um, but again, Destin, I want to come to you and get your thoughts on that and how you see that. But living here in Central Texas, I got the same flood alerts, Destin, that you did about the potential for flooding over the holiday weekend. And the folks over in Kerrville and other parts of the state would have gotten those as well. And, it's incumbent on each one of us to pay attention to that. When we're made aware of those types of situations, we need to be sky alert and watching for rain and potential issues and have a plan in place. Because in my mind, I'm never thinking, well, if something goes wrong, the county or the city is going to come and tell me and come and get me, right? It just doesn't work that way in most parts of the world. So we have to be prepared and ready to respond and get out of harm's way as much as possible. Uh, Destin, how about what's your take on all that?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about in particular is, where communication flowed between National Weather Service and then on to state, local, however those communication lines flow, and then and what actions are taken as a result of those communications that are coming from, the intended sender to the intended receiver, and then what happens. We don't have those answers, and that's part of what you're seeing in today's press conference. Actually, there were reporters pushing for information because it's day 4, right? At this point, they're like, "Well, wait, why didn't people know?" And so there are those natural questions. However, so anyway, we don't have the information to be able to fully analyze what happened from this sender to this receiver, from this sender to this receiver. All of that is subject to the future study. However, one thing people don't realize is, in the area like Hunt, or even farther west of Hunt, at the beginning of the Guadalupe River, it's about 45 minutes from Kerrville. It's not quick. So if the sheriff was told something in Kerrville, it would take him 45 minutes to get to where he needed to be. So that is not necessarily ideal. Plus, these are regions, if you live around here, if you go over a hill, you probably won't have cellular reception. Cellular reception does not go through limestone. So if you're by
Right.
the river, you probably don't have cellular access. Then the question is, well, why weren't there sirens? Why weren't there other warnings? I live in an area where there are sirens. You live in Wimberley, there are sirens.
Mhm.
This area hadn't. There's lots of stories out there you can go and read about why that may be the case. Cost has been number one.
Mhm.
However, I don't want to go back and look at those things. I'm more interested in the communication aspect. So, what happened in that communication line? What was intended, and where did it fall?
Okay, Destin, I'm going to come back to you just a minute and flesh out those thoughts a little bit. Mark, from your perspective, from a crisis planning perspective, we often say the worst things happen over a holiday weekend. And here we are again. It's a 4th of July weekend and it's a major flood, a major incident. What does that tell you about your crisis planning process and just being ready?
Well, you need to be ready for things to happen in the middle of the night or right in the middle of the holiday. And just Murphy lives, Murphy rules. And that's a part of this too. Part of analyzing this whole response was when you peel this down to a meteorological event, this is an incredibly fast developing, powerful, and deadly rainfall. You plan against possible scenarios and possible occurrences, and I think we keep broadening those to be in absorb that sometimes things may be more secure, but we just have to keep doing that. I and there's a point to also acknowledge it will always be possible for nature to overwhelm us.
Yes.
And we
Mhm.
have to not only plan to what we can handle, because there's a limit on what you can handle, but the question at that point should be, and what are we going to do when it exceeds that? And stop thinking about how we can't pave the road with responders. So we've got to begin to deal with the realities of what's going to happen. I mean, up here in the Northwest, we deal with earthquakes. We don't have earthquakes until we do, and we don't have volcanoes until they erupt. But at that point, it's not a 2.4 earthquake, and it's not some steam in the air. So in some cases, you have to be ready to manage, and really all you have left in a response that's overwhelmed is the communications part. So the real
Mhm.
question, what are you going to talk about when everybody wants to know who did it? And the answer is nobody did it. Nobody was wrong, but here
Mhm.
we are. And that is a pure communications challenge.
Yeah, well, we have, I'm in Wimberley, Texas here, and in 2015, there was a huge Memorial Day flood that eerily similar to what happened in uh, Kerrville. And we had 12 people died, I think, in that flood. And it again, middle of the night kind of thing, water, rain, significant rains upriver, and a 40-foot wall of water came through and just washed away homes. And it was just terrific. But coming out of that, this community now has a new community radio station that is the go-to source for information on weather events or civil defense emergencies, whatever it might be. So we have that system in place now, and they've also put in place a community alert system where, similar to, the National Weather Service sends out an alert about a potential flood warning. Well, the local community does that as well now. And Destin, as we go back and look at the communications around Kerrville, it sounds like they're going to be having some of those similar conversations as to what went on here in Wimberley not too long ago.
Yeah.
So,
And yes, I agree.
hey, tell me about, you've spent a little bit of time now looking at those press conferences and seeing we've had an interesting mix of federal elected officials, state officials, county officials, local officials, all in there. That's a lot of bodies to get in front of a microphone. What's your sense of how well that has been choreographed and is it serving the public interest?
Yes. So first of all, from a key message standpoint, I think they've done a fantastic job of talking about unity and coordination and actions that they're taking, their ongoing efforts, keeping the public informed about the latest as far as who has been recovered, that sort of thing. I mean, it just a wonderful. Their messages have been great. Yes, some training could occur to improve how those messages are being, shared. But overall, just a really good job with those messages. However, it's been interesting to kind of watch. There has been multiple levels of press conferences. So, and remember too that this is like 100 kilometers long response. So it's not just Kerrville. It's not just Kerr County. There's This incident has affected multiple counties
Mhm.
along multiple rivers. So this is more of a linear response. And so therefore there's been press conferences that have happened from a statewide level as well as those at the local level. And then you've had federal folks making statements and or joining
Mhm.
these other press conferences. So my first comment is I haven't noticed a public information officer there to kind of help shepherd these meetings. And it seems to me that they've kind of assigned that role to different people throughout.
Mhm.
And so there's really no one to kind of step in if things need to be disrupted or if it needs to be redirected to a different person. That role of the PIO to me is super, super important. And when you see it done really well, then you see the benefit. And I see that as missing. Unless you guys have, hey, let us know if you've seen it, and I just have missed it. Please let me know.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
again, when you've got all these different state, local agencies coming together, each one of them, has their own spokesperson in the room. And I think one of the challenges you run into is, people giving up control to one person to sort of run things. But if it's a true unified command setup, then you should have a PIO designated from one of the agencies and they speak and represent all of the agencies. So we'll
yes.
we'll be watching and see, um, if there's any more clarity around that. But that certainly would have helped things be a little more cohesive.
Yes, and
What?
someone to act as the MC.
Mhm.
Sometimes they seem, to be a little bit confused about who's up next. So that's just helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so we've had, I've watched several of the state press conferences on this, Governor Abbott hosting those. I've been very impressed with the amount of information the governor has at his fingertips. And as I watch him delivering these press conferences, he's just very good in these types of emergency situations. He's very empathetic, and yet he's just spot on with sharing information and that. So I think that speaks to the organization behind him who's gathering that information, getting him prepped and ready for this. Probably himself as well, asking questions of his team to get the right information. So I've been pretty impressed at the state level with the press conferences. Any thoughts on what you've seen there?
Yeah, state level have been great. I agree. But in addition to that, there have been state level people joining the press conferences in Kerrville. So there's been multiple levels, as I mentioned. So you've got the
Hmm.
state hosting meetings, you've got the local hosting meetings, and then what I've also noticed, which has been interesting, is a series of special guests almost
Special
to
guests at a
special
press
guests
conference.
at press conferences.
Okay.
Just yesterday, late yesterday, the local senator Ted Cruz came and spoke, and he stood right behind whoever was speaking, right in camera eye level. And
I wonder if that was an accident.
I don't know. It seemed choreographed from his perspective, but
Yeah, he was visible behind every person who spoke at the podium, right? So
yes, yes,
strategically or accidentally, he got a lot of visibility there.
yes. And then from a federal level, Kristi Noem was at one of the earlier ones, and so that there was one of the governor's press conferences early on. I want to say it was on Sunday. I can't recall. I'm sorry, I don't have that information on the tip of my fingers, but there was no update provided, and it
Oh,
felt a little from an authenticity perspective did not hit for me. There was no update provided. There was nothing about like who how many people have been affected, that sort of thing, or what are we doing right now. It was only the White House is very supportive. They're going to give us everything we asked for.
hmm.
The president loves Texas. And then Kristi Noem got on and talked about that, and there were times too where you could see like the local people kind of looking at her funny based on what she said. So it just felt, especially at the time that it was very self-serving, and I don't I I have not talked to people on the ground, but to me, even as a local stakeholder, felt that that was at the wrong time.
Yeah.
In addition, I have seen, like today, there was a game warden that came on and spoke for a little while, just giving updates on what the game wardens and what they are doing. So it seems like a series of special guests. I don't dislike it, but I'm not sure like what the what the objectives were.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and it could be one of those that as they have less new information to share, there's an opportunity to pull in others to talk about some of the peripheral issues that are happening, what's happening with livestock or animals that have been recovered and, are they corralling them somewhere to be claimed later or whatever that might be. Well, it's still an ongoing and developing response to this. It again, just a tragic incident that happened here in Texas over the July 4th holiday weekend, and you know, several several dozen of the people who were killed were young girls, campers at local Christian summer camps along the river there. So these beautiful, iconic summer camp locations and camps with, 100-year tradition of people coming and enjoying that. And all of that just shattered in one night with a huge rainfall that came through there. So it is tragic, and we always have to keep that in mind, even as we sort of look to critique the communications response and everything that's happened beyond that. So our hearts certainly go out to all the families. Can you imagine you send your son or your daughter off to summer camp and they just don't come back? It's just horrific. And
It's
like,
it's unthinkable, but unfortunately, I've thought a lot about it.
mhm.
My kids are heading to camp on Sunday.
Wow.
Um,
And
I
are
have a
you
cat.
familiar with the emergency response plan for the
I
camp?
am, and I commend
I
our
am
camp.
now.
Yes, I'm very familiar, and in fact, one of my daughters is a counselor, so I have actually read up on all of their um, emergency response plans. But
Mhm.
my daughters will be going to Wimberley next weekend. They're both early counselors. So, but I have been thinking about this a lot, and when one mother experiences something, we all experience it. I guarantee you. And I have broken into sobs a bit over the last few days. But I also, as I said, they have done a fantastic job. These are hugely difficult circumstances. These flash floods, I think if you're not from here, you don't understand. They happen and then they go away very, very quickly.
Mhm.
And so, as opposed to living through a hurricane and a hurricane flood, prone area where water sticks around, it's not like that.
Right.
This
But you
is
have a week-long
hugely,
buildup of the storm coming in and preparation time and all of that. And with something like this, it just, you don't have it, right? It's such a
you don't.
compressed thing. Yeah, as you were
You
saying.
don't. And it's absolutely horrific conditions too for the recovery, rescue and recovery groups.
Mhm.
I commend everything they've been doing and the amount of outpouring of support from everyone in Texas and beyond around the world has been amazing, and we all are super appreciative.
We know there's a lot of stress associated with the emergency responders going out doing search and rescue. You know, they've located dozens of deceased people out along that river now. And of course, just that work takes a toll on the responders, as you've mentioned, Destin. So I'll just point out that if you scan back on our previous episodes here on the podcast, we have talked to several people about PTSD as it relates to emergency responders and families that are going through situations like this. So please take a moment and look back and, if this is something you're concerned about, we've got some really interesting episodes that deal with the stress, the post-traumatic stress issues after an event like this. Destin, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to join us for this. Always appreciate hearing your perspective on communications issues here. We're certainly close to home in Central Texas with this one today. So thanks very much again for being with us.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Leading in a Crisis podcast. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to be with us today. If you'd like to reach out, please drop me an email at tom@leadinginacrisis.com, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.